I've been waiting for this video for a long time. Stuart Bloom. He's not a main character, he's not a genius, certainly not the romantic lead, and he's not even the comic relief in the traditional sense. And yet, he might be the most human character in the entire show, and I'm going to show you why. He is so important, at least to me, and I think a lot of people feel this way because he's been one of the most requested videos I've ever had, and I think that says something. With the upcoming spin-off show, Stuart Fails to Save the Universe, which I plan to cover when it comes out, it feels like the perfect time to finally talk about him. So today, we're going to talk about the complexities of Stuart. And for a minor character, there's a lot to unpack here, so get comfortable and enjoy. We first meet Stuart as the owner of the comic book store. Now, what does the comic book store represent? For the other characters, it represents escapism, a safe haven for nerd culture, a place where they can be themselves, where their interests are normalized, even celebrated. For a lot of people at the time, The Big Bang Theory was our comfort show. The comic book store is the character's version of that comfort. It's a place of comfort within a place of comfort. I don't know about you, but I actually find myself most relaxed when the show takes us to this setting, and I think this is why. So it's a place of belonging and escape. But here's the thing. That's what the comic book store represents for the characters, and to an extent the audience. But for Stuart, it's something else entirely. Because Stuart doesn't visit the store, he is the store. It's not an escape from reality, it is his reality. Stuart, perhaps because of a lack of self-confidence, does not possess a strong understanding of his identity. Because of this, he places his identity in the store. The comic book store is his identity. And when your entire identity is built on one thing, one place, one vision, you don't have anywhere to hide when it starts to fall apart, which we'll come back to later in the video. A niche identity like this one is a double-edged sword. On one side it gives you purpose, on the other it traps you. Interestingly, Kevin Sussman, who plays Stuart, actually worked in a comic book store in real life, which adds a layer of authenticity to this role, which I love. But anyway, in the show, the store becomes something symbolic. Not just of nerd culture, but of Stuart's instability, because everything about it is uncertain. The store is financially precarious, it's also socially limiting and emotionally consuming, and that instability comes to define Stuart as a character. Which brings us to this. Stuart's life is built on a three-legged stool of unstable foundations, three types of instability: financial, social, and mental. And what makes his character so compelling is that all three are constantly feeding into each other. Let's start with the financial instability. The comic book store is barely surviving. There's always this sense that it could collapse at any moment, which means Stuart's livelihood, which again is also his identity, is always at risk. There's no safety net, no backup plan, just constant uncertainty. Now, socially, Stuart exists on the edge of the group. He's there, but never fully included. He's invited sometimes, forgotten most of the time, and used when convenient. He addresses this in Season 10 Episode 6, when Sheldon and Amy invite him around for a trial dinner before they host one for their real friends, which always hits me quite hard. There's a moment when Raj brings him in more closely, when Howard goes to space, and for a brief time, Stuart almost feels like he belongs. But it doesn't last. He's slowly phased out again when Howard returns. And that's what makes it painful, because it's not rejection in a dramatic, obvious way. It's being almost part of something, but not quite. In a way, he's kind of used by the group as a replacement Howard, and a lot of people know exactly what that feels like. And what makes this even more uncomfortable is that the group isn't malicious. They don't sit there and decide to exclude Stuart. It's passive and unconscious. You know, he's useful when there's a gap, and when the gap closes, he disappears again. And that kind of exclusion is the hardest to call out, because no one feels directly responsible for it. There's another layer to this as well. It's not just that Stuart is on the outside, it's who he's on the outside of. He's surrounded by people who are objectively successful, leading scientists, people with purpose, direction, achievement. And Stuart isn't that. He's not a genius, he's not progressing in the same way, and that creates, well, for one thing, loneliness, but also an unhealthy comparison. This kind of comparison is dangerous, because it makes you feel like you're not just alone, but behind. And this leads into the third pillar, his mental health. Because Stuart isn't just awkward, he isn't just unlucky, he's struggling. And as the show goes on, that struggle becomes more apparent and harder to ignore. You know what? I think we need a separate chapter on this. Stuart's depression is often played for laughs, the throwaway lines and the dark comedy, the self-deprecating comments. But if you sit with it for a moment, it's not just comedy. The thing is, Stuart is chronically lonely. He has extremely low self-esteem. He expects things to go wrong, because, to be fair, they usually do. and over time, you can see it getting worse. He becomes quieter and more withdrawn, defeated, which is interesting because early on, if you remember, he's actually more confident, and his life seems to have a bit more colour. In Season 2, he even briefly dates Penny, he holds normal conversations, and he feels stable. But then something begins to shift, and instead of a steady character arc upwards, Stuart declines. And I want to pause here, this is super important. All of the character arcs are linear, some of them are exponential, and some of them plateau, but Stuart's arc is one of decline, and eventual rise. This graph is what makes him, in some ways, the most relatable character in The Big Bang Theory, because in real life, growth is not linear, and it is certainly not exponential. I don't care how successful or fulfilled you are, everyone in this world lives a life of peaks and troughs. Sometimes it feels like we are going one step forward and 2 steps back. There are moments of doubt, pain, failure, and then pleasant surprises, minor wins, and eventual growth. And the growth is born out of failure, because the only thing you can really learn from is failure. And that's what makes Stuart so relatable. He reflects that uncomfortable truth, that sometimes things don't get better until they get worse. Stuart also relies heavily on medication. Antidepressants are mentioned repeatedly, and while the show plays this lightly, it hints at something, which is that even if it doesn't work, he is at least trying, which tells us that he has hope that things can improve. Stuart is one of the only characters in the show who is allowed to fail and stay failed for a long time. He fails in a slow, lingering way, and that's rare in sitcoms, because most characters bounce back quickly, they reset every episode, but Stuart doesn't. Well, actually he does, it's just that his baseline is failure, his normal is self-loathing, and so when the show resets each episode as sitcoms do, this is the place Stuart is returned to, and it's a dark place. And the depression really explains why Stuart experiences such a noticeable decline. It gets worse and worse, which is often the nature of depression. And this is where I just want to quickly pause the video for a few seconds. If any of this resonates with you, please don't sit with it alone. Reach out to someone, whether it's a friend or a professional. Don't be embarrassed, don't assume that it's pointless. I'm not trying to be preachy, I'm just saying this as someone who has seen depression ruin many lives. But this is more of a reminder to just not sit with it alone. Okay, unpause, back to Stuart. Stuart's humour is different. It's not clever in the traditional sense. His humour is self-deprecating. He makes himself the punchline, and that does 2 things. Firstly, it makes him disarming. There's no ego there, no sense that he's trying to impress anyone. And secondly, it makes him relatable. Interestingly, I realise that Stuart's humour feels quite familiar, and that's because I'm British. In our culture and in our comedy, self-deprecation is much more prominent than in American culture and comedy. So, in the context of The Big Bang Theory, this kind of humour works in an interesting way, and it brings an alternative humour to the show which is kind of offbeat with the rest of the comedy. It's another thing that separates Stuart as a character, and for Stuart on a personal level, the idea is, if you make the joke first, no one else can hurt you with it, and Stuart embodies that. And this self-deprecation feeds his lower self-esteem, which contributes to his overall mental health, which in turn contributes to his overall instability. It goes on and on like this, it's all connected, which I realised in the brainstorming for this video. Stuart is complex. There's another layer to Stuart that I think is easy to miss but really important. He doesn't just exist within nerd culture. He kind of represents it, or at least a version of it that we don't often see on screen, because most of the main characters in the show represent an idealized version of nerd culture. They're brilliant and successful, and their niche interests become strengths. Their intelligence leads to careers, relationships, and recognition. In many ways, they win, and that's great. It's aspirational, it's comforting, but Stuart represents the other side of that same world. The side where passion doesn't automatically translate into success, and where loving something deeply, whether it's art or superheroes, doesn't mean you'll build a life from it. It's where being part of a culture doesn't guarantee you'll feel like you belong within it. He runs the comic book store, the heart of nerd culture in the show, and yet he's the one who benefits from it least. And I don't think that's accidental, because in real life, subcultures aren't made up entirely of success stories. They're made up of people at all different stages, including people who thrive, people who plateau, people who struggle on the edges. And Stuart is that edge. He's the person who loves the same things and speaks the same language, but doesn't quite get the same outcome. And that doesn't make him a failure, it makes him real. In a strange way, Stuart anchors nerd culture. He stops it from becoming a fantasy where everything works out just because you're passionate or different. He reminds us that identity alone isn't enough, that community doesn't always equal connection, and that even in spaces designed for belonging, some people still feel out of place. But at the same time, he also shows that there is a place for those people. It just might take longer to find. It might look different. It might be smaller and less obvious. And maybe that's the most honest representation of nerd culture the show gives us. Not the relative success stories, but the people still figuring it out. Now we get to the climax of Stuart's story, the burning of the comic book store, the lowest point of Stuart's arc. The comic book store burns down, and symbolically, so does Stuart, because as we said earlier, the store isn't just his job, it's his identity. So when it's gone, he's left with nothing to anchor himself. He feels completely empty and alone and adrift. And this is where something unexpected happens. Mrs. Wolowitz takes him in, and their dynamic is one of the most important relationships in his story, perhaps the most important, at least the most life-changing, because they're both lonely, they both need someone, and for the first time, Stuart is doing something more than surviving. Together they become support and presence. It's mutual, and above all, it's human. What Mrs. Wolowitz really gives Stuart is something he's never had before, which is a role. He's not just the guy with the shop anymore, he's someone who is needed, and being needed is one of the most stabilizing forces in a person's life. It gives you a reason to get up, a reason to function, so this becomes a turning point. It is the beginning of stability. Eventually he reopens the store, but something has changed. The store is no longer who he is, at least not entirely. It's just something he does, and as a result, the comic book store slowly begins to succeed. Stuart needs it to succeed financially, of course, and that's normal in business, but he no longer needs it to succeed existentially or emotionally. Finally, the decline of Stuart's arc is over. We now get the gentle rise. By the later seasons, Stuart starts to feel different. He's more stable, as we've said. He is also included more, and he becomes a key figure in the show. He's more valued as a friend, although not as valued as I'd like him to be. While other characters follow clearer, more traditional arcs, Stuart's is messy, but it's also more honest. Rather than a sitcom character, it seems to resemble the character out of a drama film. Mrs. Wolowitz plays a huge role in his arc, as we've said. She gives him structure, connection, and a sense of being needed. And the birth of Howard and Bernadette's first child brings some additional responsibility into his life. But more importantly, Denise comes into his life. Denise represents something Stuart never really believed he'd have. Reciprocal love. Not pity, not convenience, actual connection. And what makes Denise different is that she doesn't fix Stuart. She doesn't transform him into someone else. She meets him exactly where he is. Same interests, same world, same pace, and she appreciates him and his talents. And for Stuart, that's everything. For the first time, rather than chasing something he feels unworthy of, he is finally a part of it. At the end of the day, he was always a more peripheral character in The Big Bang Theory, and the show could have decided to keep him in that one-dimensional, painful pit of instability. But I'm so grateful that they decided to give him some development and love by the end. It completely changes the show for me. And even though he isn't a primary character, without this growth, I think the finale of the show would have had an entirely different atmosphere. Stuart isn't just relatable for one reason. He represents something deeper about the world of the show, and in a way, the real world too. Although it's criticised by many for how it pokes fun at nerd culture, The Big Bang Theory is seen by others as a celebration of a very specific kind of life, while being honest about the tribulations of living such a life. But it's a life where being different works out in the end, where niche interests turn into careers, where intelligence leads to success, where friendship groups form naturally around shared identity, and unlikely relationships thrive through passion and intrigue. And for the main characters, that's largely true. Their passions pay off. They find stability and purpose. But Stuart doesn't follow that path, not for the vast majority of the show. He represents the version of that life where things don't quite come together. The version where passion doesn't guarantee success, where being part of a culture doesn't guarantee belonging, where things feel uncertain and unfinished. And that's what makes him feel so real, because most people don't experience life as a clean upward trajectory. Most people exist somewhere in the middle, trying to figure things out, trying to find their place. And that's where Stuart lives. But it's not just that he struggles, it's how he struggles. Stuart isn't rejected loudly, he's not the centre of conflict. He's not pushed out in a dramatic way, he's overlooked. He exists on the edge, included but not fully, seen but not really noticed. Valued, rarely, and only in certain moments. He fills a space when there's a gap, and when the gap closes, he fades again. And that kind of invisibility is incredibly difficult to deal with, because there's nothing concrete to point to. No clear moment where things went wrong, just a slow and silent feeling of not quite belonging. And over time, that does something to a person. It changes how you see yourself. You stop expecting to be included. You stop assuming you matter in the same way. You become smaller in your own mind. And when you combine that with everything else we've talked about, the instability, the depression, the comparison, the loneliness, it starts to make sense. Stuart is a character shaped by an environment he's never fully a part of, but he's important because he reflects a version of life that we don't always see on screen, especially in sitcoms. The in-between, the uncertain, the messy. And maybe that's why people connect with him so strongly. Because he doesn't represent who we want to be, he represents the part of ourselves we don't always talk about or give time to, the feeling of being on the outside looking in, but also the slow, uneven path towards something better. He reminds us that growth isn't always visible, that progress doesn't always look impressive, and that sometimes just staying afloat is enough. Stuart Bloom isn't the hero of the story, not by a long shot. He doesn't save the universe, and apparently things don't change. But in a subliminal way, maybe that's why we love this character. He brings something human and much needed to the universe of The Big Bang Theory. For me, especially towards the end, he is a huge part of what redeems the show. And so in a way, Stuart does save the universe. Right, I'm gonna have to hold the microphone a bit awkwardly. Hello, surprise! I'm on camera for the first time on YouTube, can you believe it? My name's Sam, and I'm the Been Thinking guy. I'm the guy behind that voice you hear, that droning, monotonous voice. I'm just kidding, I try my best, and that's an example of self-deprecating humour, by the way. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been a part of this channel so far, and who's responded to it positively. This channel's about analysis, but it's also about understanding and empathy and discussion, so thank you for being a part of that discussion. Now, it's recently become apparent to me that this channel needs to become less faceless, and that's because of content ID issues, because of advice I've received, and I just want to bring a bit more identity to the channel. Now, I don't want you to think this is going to change the channel in any significant way. I know a lot of people like the reflective and calm style. This is just going to be an addition. It's not going to be a change, more of an addition is what I'm trying to say. I'm going to maybe have some, informal discussion at the end of videos like this, and every so often I'll probably do videos that are mostly on camera, like the upcoming Q&A video. And by the way, speaking of which, if you have a question and you're watching this video within the first 24 hours, there's still time to go and ask. I've got some great ones already, but if you have a particularly interesting question, I'll probably include it on the video. So, link in description. And 2 other pieces of information. We now have an Instagram, in case you missed that. I know Instagram's not for everyone, it's not really my thing either, but it's a good way to update you, and also I can put some behind the scenes stuff on there as well. I think that might be fun. And then lastly, a thank you to all my subscribers and a special shout out to the Thinkers on Patreon. If you're interested, you can become a Thinker as well if you follow the link in the description. I think that's where I'm going to end the video, otherwise I'm just going to be rambling, but thank you so much, and I hope you have a great week.